The unlikely assignment. Commander Marcus Kane paced the metallic halls of the USC Resolute Vanguard, his boots clinking against the cold steel floor. The faint hum of the ship's massive engines provided a steady backdrop to the turmoil brewing in his mind. His latest assignment wasn't one he'd volunteered for. It was thrust upon him by orders from command. Protecting an alien princess on a diplomatic mission was far from the tactical challenges he thrived on. Admiral Work's stern face lingered in Marcus's thoughts. "She's the linchpin to the alliance with the Kithar Dominion," the Admiral had emphasized. "If she doesn't make it to the summit, years of negotiations will crumble. You're the only one I trust for this, Kane." Marcus wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a punishment. Either way, the responsibility felt heavier than his combat armor. The first encounter. The diplomatic wing of the ship was unlike the rest of the utilitarian vessel. Soft lighting and intricate designs adorned the corridors, a stark contrast to the cold efficiency elsewhere. 2 Kitharian guards, their obsidian armor shimmering faintly, stood sentinel at the entrance to the princess's quarters. Their narrowed eyes and rigid postures made their disdain for Marcus's presence evident. He presented his identification. Commander Marcus Kane, assigned to Princess Elira's security detail. One guard sneered, his voice laced with contempt. A human? Protecting her? How quaint. Before Marcus could respond, the doors hissed open. Princess Elira emerged, her ethereal presence silencing the tension. Her emerald green skin glowed softly under the lights, and her cascading silver hair shimmered like threads of moonlight. She moved with an elegance that seemed almost otherworldly, but her piercing golden eyes locked onto Marcus with a sharpness that betrayed no illusions of grandeur. "So," she said, her voice melodic but firm, "this is the human they've chosen to guard me. I expected someone more imposing." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but kept his tone professional. "My size won't matter if I'm doing my job right, Your Highness." Her lips twitched in a faint smirk, though it disappeared as quickly as it had formed. "We'll see about that." A sudden threat. As Marcus prepared to follow Elira to her quarters, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the sharp blare of the ship's emergency klaxons erupted, cutting through the calm. Instinctively, Marcus reached for his sidearm. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. Elira's guards had already drawn their weapons, but Marcus's instincts told him that they wouldn't be enough. The ship lurched again, throwing everyone off balance. Marcus grabbed Elira's arm, steadying her before she fell. "How dare you?" she began, but her protest was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a nearby explosion. Smoke filled the corridor, and shadows moved in the periphery of his vision. "Ambush," Marcus growled. "This way." Ignoring Elira's protests, he pulled her into a nearby maintenance tunnel. The princess's guards hesitated, trying to secure the main hallway, but a sudden barrage of plasma fire forced them back. "Commander Kane," Elira snapped as they ducked into the narrow passage. "Do you plan to drag me through every filthy crevice of this ship?" Marcus glanced back, his expression grim. "Unless you prefer getting incinerated out there, I suggest you keep moving." She scowled but followed, her shimmering form dimmed slightly in the shadows. They navigated the cramped tunnels until Marcus reached a secure bulkhead leading to the crew quarters. With a quick code entry, the doors slid open, revealing his modest room. Forced proximity. Elira stepped inside, her nose wrinkling at the Spartan furnishings. A narrow bed, a small desk cluttered with datapads, and a worn holoposter of Earth's lush forests were the only signs of personality in the space. "This is where you live?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. Marcus ignored her comment and locked the door behind them. "It's secure. For now, that's what matters." She eyed the single bed and raised a skeptical brow. "And where, pray tell, do you expect me to sleep?" Marcus gestured to the bed. "You can have it. I'll take the floor." Elira crossed her arms, her irritation evident. "This arrangement is unacceptable." He sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Your Highness, with all due respect, we're under attack. I don't have time to debate sleeping arrangements. If we survive the night, we can revisit the discussion." Before she could retort, a muffled explosion reverberated through the walls. Marcus moved to the small viewport, peering into the dark void of space. The flashes of laser fire and the looming shadow of an enemy vessel confirmed his fears. "They've boarded us," he said, turning back to Elira. "Whoever they are, they're after you." Her golden eyes narrowed. "And you plan to stop them alone?" Marcus smirked, his resolve hardening. "If I have to, yes." An uneasy alliance. Despite her initial protests, Elira seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation. She sat on the edge of the bed, her luminous aura dimmed with worry. "If I am captured or killed, it will plunge my people and yours into war," she said quietly. Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "That's why I won't let it happen." For the first time, Elira studied him without disdain. "You truly believe you can protect me?" "I've faced worse odds," Marcus replied with a faint smile. "And I've never lost someone under my watch." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she spoke again. "Very well, Commander. I'll trust you, for now." As the ship trembled under the onslaught of enemy fire, Marcus began formulating a plan. The mission was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that even amidst the vastness of space, humanity's determination and ingenuity could bridge even the widest divides. And perhaps it was about earning the respect of a princess who had underestimated him from the start. Shadows in the corridors. The USC Resolute Vanguard groaned under the weight of the assault, its metallic structure trembling like a wounded beast. Commander Marcus Kane had fortified the door to his quarters, but the distant echoes of combat filtering through the walls reminded him that their safety was temporary at best. Princess Elira sat on the bed, her luminous aura flickering like a dying star. "You seem oddly calm for someone being hunted," Marcus remarked, glancing at her as he checked his sidearm. Elira arched a silver brow. "Calm? Hardly. I simply don't see the point in panicking. Does that offend your human sensibilities?" Marcus chuckled dryly. "Offend me? No. Surprise me? Maybe." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But if we're going to get out of this alive, I need you to listen to me. No arguments. No royal indignation. Can you manage that?" Elira folded her arms, her golden eyes narrowing. "You presume much, Commander. But for now, I'll humor you." The first breakthrough. Their uneasy truce was interrupted by a sharp, rhythmic beeping. Marcus pulled a small tablet from his pocket, its screen displaying a schematic of the ship. His brow furrowed. "What is it?" Elira asked, standing to peer over his shoulder. "Breaches in the lower decks," he muttered. "3 separate teams. They're splitting up to search for you." Elira's skin glimmered faintly with agitation. "So, what do you propose? Hide here until they find us?" "Hardly." Marcus pulled a small metal case from under his bed, opening it to reveal a compact, high-tech rifle. "We're moving to the engineering section. If I can disable their access points, we'll trap them before they reach us." Her lips twitched into something resembling a smirk. "A bold plan. And what makes you think I'll follow you into the depths of your ship?" Marcus slung the rifle over his shoulder and met her gaze. "Because if you don't, you'll die here. And as much as I'm sure that would inconvenience your royal sensibilities, it would inconvenience galactic diplomacy a whole lot more." Elira studied him for a moment before sighing. "Lead the way, Commander. But if we're caught, I'll expect you to take the first shot. Wouldn't have it any other way." The journey begins. The corridors were eerily quiet as they moved. Marcus led, his weapon raised, while Elira followed close behind, her footsteps unnervingly light for someone wearing ceremonial shoes. The emergency lights bathed the ship in a dim, flickering red glow, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them as they passed. "Do your people always build ships like mausoleums?" Elira asked, her voice a hushed whisper. "It's functional," Marcus replied without looking back. "And right now, I'm more worried about what's lurking in the shadows than the decor." As if on cue, a faint scraping noise echoed from a nearby vent. Marcus froze, raising a hand to signal Elira to stop. He scanned the area, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. "What is it?" she whispered, her glowing skin dimming instinctively as though trying to make herself less of a target. "Trouble," Marcus murmured. "Stay behind me." First contact. The vent cover burst open with a deafening clang, and a hulking insectoid figure lunged into the corridor. Its chitinous body gleamed under the emergency lights, and its 6 razor-sharp limbs clicked ominously as it advanced. Marcus fired without hesitation, the rifle's energy bolts tearing into the creature's torso. It screeched and collapsed in a heap, twitching as its life ebbed away. Elira gasped, her golden eyes wide. "What is that?" "Boarding party scout," Marcus said, his tone clipped. "There will be more." No sooner had the words left his mouth than another vent burst open, followed by 2 more attackers. Marcus fired again, taking down one, but the second darted toward Elira with terrifying speed. "Get down," he shouted, shoving her aside as he stepped into the creature's path. Its claws raked across his shoulder, but he managed to fire a point-blank shot that sent it crumpling to the floor. Elira scrambled to her feet, her skin pulsing with fear and anger. "You're bleeding." "Noticed?" Marcus grunted, pressing a hand to his wound. "But we don't have time for first aid. Move." Engineering under siege. They reached the engineering section, a sprawling maze of machinery and control panels. The hum of the ship's core was louder here, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and the void of space. Marcus sealed the door behind them and began typing furiously on a control panel. Elira hovered nearby, her usual composure replaced by a rare nervous energy. "Can you really lock them out?" she asked. "I can try," Marcus replied. "But it's not just about locking them out. I need to reroute the ship's power to set up a defensive perimeter. It'll take time." "And what do we do if they get here before you're done?" Marcus glanced at her, his face grim. "Then we fight." A shared resolve. As Marcus worked, Elira found herself watching him with a mix of curiosity and begrudging respect. Despite his injury, his focus was unshaken, his movements precise and deliberate. He was nothing like the humans she had encountered in diplomatic circles, brash, arrogant, and prone to posturing. Marcus Kane was a soldier through and through. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly. "Risk your life for someone you don't even know." Marcus didn't look up. "It's my job." "That's not an answer." He sighed, pausing to meet her gaze. "Because it matters. Because if I don't, everything we fought for, peace, alliances, the chance for our people to coexist, falls apart. And because—" He hesitated, then smirked. "I'm stubborn." Elira blinked, then let out a soft laugh despite herself. "You're certainly that." Before Marcus could respond, the door shook violently as something slammed into it from the other side. The sound of claws scraping against metal filled the room, and Elira's glow dimmed with renewed fear. "Time's up," Marcus said, raising his rifle. "Get ready." The fight for survival had only just begun. The assault on engineering. The reinforced door to the engineering bay trembled under the relentless assault, the sound of claws and plasma cutters tearing into its steel frame. Commander Marcus Kane braced himself against a console, his rifle aimed steadily at the only entrance. The emergency lights flickered ominously, casting the scene in shades of crimson and shadow. Princess Elira stood behind him, her normally radiant presence subdued by fear and tension. Her golden eyes darted between Marcus and the door as if weighing her next move. "Do your ships always feel like they're moments away from falling apart under pressure?" she asked, her voice laced with a forced calm. Marcus smirked, never taking his eyes off the door. "Keeps things interesting. You'll appreciate it when we're alive to talk about it." The door gave a deafening groan, and Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. The breach. With a screech of tearing metal, the door finally gave way. The first invader, a towering insectoid figure clad in jagged armor, charged into the room. Marcus fired immediately, his energy rounds punching through its chest with surgical precision. The creature collapsed in a heap, but two more took its place. Elira gasped as one of the attackers launched itself toward her. Before it could close the gap, Marcus lunged forward, slamming the butt of his rifle into its head and firing point-blank into its thorax. The alien let out a chittering screech before crumpling to the ground. The third attacker lunged for Marcus, its claws swiping dangerously close to his neck. Elira acted on instinct, grabbing a nearby wrench and swinging it with surprising strength. The impact threw the creature off balance, giving Marcus enough time to deliver a killing shot. He glanced at her, breathing hard. Not bad for a princess. Elira straightened, her shimmering hair slightly disheveled. Desperate times call for desperate measures, Commander. A plan takes shape. As more footsteps echoed down the corridor, Marcus knew their position wouldn't hold much longer. He motioned for Elira to follow him deeper into the engineering bay, where a maze of machinery and piping offered some cover. "We can't keep fighting them off like this," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "There are too many." Marcus crouched behind a console, typing rapidly into a keypad. "I'm not planning to. I'm rerouting the power grid to overload the auxiliary conduits in this section. It'll create an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to disable their weapons. And them." Elira's eyes widened. "And us." Marcus shrugged, a flicker of humor in his gaze. "Not if I do it right." She frowned but didn't argue. Instead, she crouched beside him, watching as he worked. "You're oddly confident for someone improvising under fire." "It's not improvising," he said, his tone surprisingly calm. "It's adapting. Big difference." The turning point. The pounding of footsteps grew louder, and Marcus's fingers moved faster across the console. Elira could see sweat beading on his forehead, but his focus never wavered. "They're almost here," she said, glancing nervously toward the doorway. "Almost done," he replied, his voice steady. As the first shadow appeared in the doorway, Marcus hit a final key and slammed his hand down on a lever. The hum of the ship's systems intensified, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. "Brace yourself," he shouted, grabbing Elira and pulling her behind a large metal console. The EMP detonated with a blinding flash, accompanied by a wave of heat that rattled the room. The invaders let out a unified screech as their weapons and cybernetic enhancements short-circuited, sending them sprawling to the floor. Sparks flew from the walls, and the lights flickered before stabilizing. Elira blinked, her glowing skin slowly returning to its natural shimmer. Did it work? Marcus peered over the console, scanning the room. The invaders lay motionless, their limbs twitching sporadically. "For now," he said, standing and reloading his rifle. "But it won't be long before they send reinforcements." A growing respect. Elira followed him cautiously as they navigated the aftermath of the battle. She glanced at the fallen invaders, her expression unreadable. "You're efficient," Marcus snorted. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," she said, surprising herself. "For a human." He glanced back at her, smirking. High praise. As they reached the far side of the engineering bay, Marcus stopped and examined a ventilation shaft. "This leads to the command deck," he said. "We'll be safer there, assuming the captain hasn't already abandoned ship." "And if he has?" Elira asked, folding her arms. Marcus grinned, his usual confidence returning. "Then I guess it's up to us to save the day." For the first time since the attack began, Elira found herself smiling despite the chaos. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Why not both?" he quipped, motioning for her to follow. "Come on, Your Highness. The day's not over yet." A new alliance. As they climbed into the ventilation shaft, Elira couldn't help but reflect on the strange alliance she'd formed with this human. Marcus Kane was nothing like the diplomats and dignitaries she was used to. He was raw, determined, and surprisingly resourceful. And for the first time, she began to wonder if there was more to humanity than she'd given them credit for. "Commander," she said as they moved through the narrow space, "if we survive this, I may have to reconsider my opinion of your people." Marcus glanced back at her, his expression softening. "I'll hold you to that. For now, survival was their only goal." But Elira couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them could imagine. A fragile trust. The air inside the ventilation shaft was cold and thin, the hum of the ship's systems reverberating faintly through the walls. Commander Marcus Kane led the way, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the cramped space. Behind him, Princess Elira followed, her usual graceful demeanor muted by the necessity of crawling through a steel tunnel. "This is undignified," she muttered, her glowing hair dimming as it brushed against the ceiling. Marcus chuckled softly. "Welcome to my world, Your Highness. We don't all get palaces and ceremonial guards." "Do you always have to make light of every situation?" she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. Marcus paused, glancing back over his shoulder. His face was shadowed, but there was a flicker of understanding in his tone. "If I didn't, the weight of it all would crush me. Humor keeps me focused. You should try it." Elira huffed but said nothing, her silence more contemplative than annoyed. For the first time, she wondered if the human's irreverence was less a flaw and more a shield. The discovery. The shaft opened into an abandoned maintenance bay, dimly lit and eerily quiet. Marcus dropped down first, his rifle sweeping the room as he scanned for threats. Satisfied, he motioned for Elira to follow. The space was a chaotic tangle of discarded tools, exposed wiring, and half-finished repairs. A faint flicker of light emanated from a control console at the far end of the room. "What is this place?" Elira asked, stepping cautiously onto the floor. "Secondary maintenance bay," Marcus replied. "Mostly used for repairs the crew didn't have time to finish. Should be some backup systems we can use." As he approached the console, something caught Elira's eye. She knelt beside a crate, brushing aside a layer of dust, to reveal a small, intricate device. It was a sphere of polished metal, etched with alien symbols that glowed faintly at her touch. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up. Marcus turned, his brow furrowing. "A Cytherian energy core, highly volatile." His voice hardened. "Put it down, carefully." Elira hesitated, the core's faint warmth radiating through her fingers. "Why would something like this be here?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his tone uneasy. "But it doesn't belong on this ship. Someone planted it." The implications hung heavy in the air. Elira placed the core back in the crate, her movements deliberate. "Sabotage." Marcus nodded grimly. "Looks like it. Whoever's attacking us might have had help from the inside. A growing danger." As Marcus worked on the console, Elira paced the room, her mind racing. The realization that someone aboard the Resolute Vanguard had betrayed them was both infuriating and terrifying. "Do you trust your crew, Commander?" she asked suddenly. Marcus didn't look up from his work. "I trust most of them. But trust is a luxury in situations like this. Right now, I only trust what I can see. And me." She pressed, her tone almost teasing. Marcus glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You? I trust you to keep complaining about the accommodations." Elira rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. "Charming." Before Marcus could respond, the console beeped and his smirk vanished. "Got something," he said, his voice all business again. Elira joined him, peering over his shoulder at the screen. It displayed a schematic of the ship, with several sections highlighted in red. "What does it mean?" she asked. "Those are the enemy's access points," Marcus explained. "They're setting up charges to breach the command deck." Elira's skin glimmered faintly with alarm. "We have to stop them." Marcus nodded, already packing his gear. "We will. But it's going to get messy." The ambush. They moved quickly through the maintenance bay's secondary exit, heading toward the command deck. Marcus led the way, his rifle at the ready, while Elira followed, her steps quieter now as she mimicked his careful movements. The corridors grew narrower as they approached their destination, the walls lined with exposed wiring and pipes. The air felt heavier here, the hum of the ship's systems almost oppressive. As they turned a corner, Marcus stopped abruptly, raising a fist to signal silence. Elira froze, her glowing skin dimming instinctively. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on a shadow just ahead. Slowly, he gestured for her to move back. But before they could retreat, the shadow moved, a hulking figure stepping into the light, its alien form bristling with weapons. Marcus fired first, his energy bolts lighting up the corridor. The alien dodged with unnerving speed, returning fire with a plasma rifle. The shots scorched the walls around them, forcing Marcus and Elira to dive for cover. "Stay down," Marcus barked, rolling to a better position and firing again. Elira pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She hated feeling helpless, but without a weapon, she could do little but watch as Marcus fought. His movements were precise, almost graceful, as he outmaneuvered the attacker. An unexpected ally. The fight was brutal but short. Marcus's final shot hit the alien square in the chest, sending it crashing to the floor. He approached cautiously, ensuring it was dead before lowering his rifle. Elira emerged from her hiding spot, her golden eyes narrowing at the fallen attacker. "It's not like the others," she noted, pointing to the intricate markings on its armor. Marcus knelt to examine the body. "No, it's not. Looks like a mercenary. Someone hired them." "By whom?" Elira asked. "That's what we need to find out," Marcus said, standing and offering her a hand. "But first, we need to secure the command deck." She hesitated before taking his hand, her glowing fingers brushing against his. "You're relentless, Commander." Marcus grinned, pulling her to her feet. "That's why I'm still alive." As they pressed on, Elira couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the human beside her. He was brash, irreverent, and maddeningly stubborn, but he was also unwavering in his resolve. And in this moment, she realized she was glad to have him by her side. The heart of the storm. The corridor leading to the command deck was a battlefield waiting to ignite. The distant echoes of gunfire and the occasional tremor from the ship's hull were a constant reminder of how close they were to the edge. Commander Marcus Kane kept his weapon raised, his steps slow and deliberate as he scanned for threats. Princess Elira trailed just behind him, her usual elegance muted by the tense atmosphere. "You seem unusually quiet," Marcus said without looking back, his voice low but steady. "I'm thinking," Elira replied, her golden eyes darting to every shadow, "about how many times I've come close to dying in the last hour." Marcus smirked. "Welcome to life on the edge. It keeps you sharp." She scoffed softly but said nothing more, her focus returning to the task at hand. The faint glow of her skin provided an ethereal contrast to the ship's cold, metallic interior, a beacon of hope in an otherwise grim setting. The command deck breach. The closer they got to the command deck, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Marcus motioned for Elira to stop as they reached a sealed bulkhead, its edges scorched as if someone had attempted to force it open. "Looks like they tried to breach this already," Marcus muttered, running his hand over the scorched surface. He crouched down to inspect the control panel, his fingers moving deftly across the keypad. Elira watched him with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. "Can you open it?" "I can try," he replied, his tone distracted. "But if they've tampered with the systems, it might take a while." As he worked, Elira turned her attention to the corridor behind them. A faint sound, a scraping, almost imperceptible, caught her ear. She tensed, her glowing skin dimming instinctively. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice tight. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he followed her gaze. The sound grew louder, closer. Without hesitation, Marcus abandoned the console and pulled her behind a nearby support column, his rifle raised. The stalker in the shadows. The scraping noise stopped abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence. Elira held her breath, her pulse racing as she strained to hear any sign of movement. Marcus's posture was rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring. Then, out of the darkness, it appeared. The creature was unlike the others they'd encountered. It moved with a predatory grace, its sleek insectoid body shimmering faintly in the dim light. Its eyes glowed a sinister red, and the serrated blades extending from its arms gleamed with menace. "Stay down," Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible. The creature tilted its head, as if sensing their presence. It emitted a low, guttural growl, and Elira felt a chill run down her spine. "What is that?" she whispered. "Trouble," Marcus replied grimly. "Stay here." Before she could protest, he stepped out from behind the column, his rifle aimed at the creature. "Hey," he called, his voice firm. "Over here." The creature hissed, its eyes locking onto them. In a blur of motion, it charged. A desperate fight. Marcus opened fire, his energy bolts illuminating the corridor as they struck the creature's carapace. It screeched in anger, its movements faster than anything he'd encountered before. One of its blades swiped dangerously close to his chest, forcing him to dive out of the way. "Marcus!" Elira shouted, her voice laced with panic. He rolled to his feet, firing again. This time, one of his shots hit a joint in the creature's armor, causing it to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, Marcus lunged forward, slamming the butt of his rifle into its head. The creature retaliated, its blade slicing through the air and grazing Marcus's arm. He winced but didn't falter, using the momentum to deliver another strike that sent the creature crashing to the floor. Elira stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. She grabbed a nearby pipe, wielding it like a staff as she joined the fray. The creature lunged at her, but she sidestepped with surprising agility, swinging the pipe and connecting with a sickening crunch. Together, they overwhelmed it. Marcus's final shot pierced its core, and the creature let out a final screech before collapsing in a lifeless heap. A moment of reflection. Breathing heavily, Marcus leaned against the wall, his rifle dangling at his side. Elira approached him, her glow brighter now, as if fueled by adrenaline. "You're injured," she said, pointing to the gash on his arm. "I've had worse," he replied, his smirk returning. "You've got a decent swing, by the way." She raised an eyebrow, her tone dry. "I'll take that as a compliment." He chuckled, then turned his attention back to the bulkhead. "Let's finish this." Elira watched as he returned to the console, his movements slower but no less determined. For the first time, she felt a pang of genuine respect for the human soldier. He was rough around the edges, yes, but his resolve was unshakable. "The command deck awaits." With a hiss, the bulkhead finally opened, revealing the command deck beyond. The room was a chaotic mess, its consoles sparking and screens flickering. A handful of crew members were huddled near the center, their expressions a mix of relief and fear as they spotted Marcus and Elira. "Commander Kane," one of the officers called. "We thought we were done for." "Not yet," Marcus replied, stepping inside. "But we're not out of the woods." Elira followed, her presence commanding immediate attention. The crew members stared, their awe evident as her glowing form stepped into the light. "Your Highness," Marcus said, gesturing to her, "I believe you have a few words to inspire the troops." She hesitated for a moment, then straightened her posture. "We've come this far," she began, her voice steady and clear. "And we will not falter now. Together, we will show our enemies that neither humans nor Catharians bow to fear." The crew erupted in a cheer, their spirits visibly lifted. Marcus watched her with a faint smile, nodding to himself. "Not bad," he muttered. "Not bad at all." The battle for the resolute vanguard was far from over, but for the first time, hope burned brighter than ever. The battle within. The command deck buzzed with a chaotic energy that felt both electrifying and suffocating. Crew members scrambled to repair damaged systems, their voices rising above the hum of malfunctioning equipment. At the center of it all stood Commander Marcus Kane and Princess Elira, an unlikely duo now bound by a singular purpose. Marcus scanned the room, his eyes darting between the flickering monitors and the tense faces of the crew. "What's our status?" he asked, directing the question to a frazzled communications officer. "Multiple breaches across decks 3 and 5, the officer replied, her voice strained. "Main weapons are offline, and shields are operating at 20%. Enemy forces are converging on this deck." "Perfect," Marcus muttered, his sarcasm masking the weight of the situation. "Guess we're the last line of defense." Elira stepped forward, her luminous presence drawing the crew's attention. "We are not defeated yet," she said firmly. "Activate whatever defenses you have left. We will not allow this ship to fall." Her words sparked a ripple of determination through the room, but Marcus knew inspiration alone wouldn't save them. A plan against the clock. Marcus moved to the central console, the Lyra at his side. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the ship's layout and the advancing enemy forces. The invaders were methodical, their movements coordinated and precise. "They're cutting off every escape route," Elira observed, her voice tinged with urgency. "How do we stop them?" Marcus rubbed his chin, his mind racing. "We don't need to stop all of them, just enough to buy time. If we can reroute power to the auxiliary shield generators and set up a bottleneck here," he pointed to a narrow corridor leading to the command deck, "we can force them into a kill zone." "Won't they anticipate that?" Elira asked. "They might," Marcus admitted. "But if we overload the generators at the right moment, we can create a feedback pulse strong enough to disable their tech, temporarily." Elira raised a skeptical brow. "And if it backfires, then we're out of options," Marcus said bluntly. "You have a better idea." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Do it." The enemy advances. The minutes felt like hours as the crew worked to implement Marcus's plan. The sound of gunfire and distant explosions grew louder, each one a reminder of how close the enemy was. Marcus adjusted his rifle, his expression grim. "You've been awfully quiet," he said, glancing at Elira. She stood near the viewport, her golden eyes fixed on the stars beyond. "Just preparing myself," she said softly. "For what?" She turned to him, her expression unusually vulnerable. "For the possibility that this might be the end." Marcus smirked, his tone light but steady. "Not on my watch." Elira's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "You're insufferable, and you're lucky for it." Their brief moment of levity was interrupted by the sound of metal grinding. The main access door to the command deck shook violently as something pounded against it. "They're here," Marcus said, his voice tightening. He turned to the crew. "Everyone to your positions. Hold the line." The final stand. The door burst open with a deafening crash, and the enemy poured in. These were no ordinary attackers, sleek, cybernetic warriors armed with advanced weaponry. Their crimson eyes glowed with a mechanical malice as they surged forward. Marcus opened fire, his energy bolts striking the first wave with deadly precision. The crew joined in, their weapons lighting up the room in bursts of blue and orange. Elira took cover behind a console, her fingers clutching a plasma pistol she had retrieved from a fallen guard. "Behind you," she shouted. Marcus spun just in time to see one of the attackers lunging at him. He ducked, driving the butt of his rifle into its midsection before firing point-blank into its chest. The creature collapsed, sparks flying from its shattered core. The battle raged on, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning circuitry. Despite their efforts, the enemy continued to press forward, their numbers seemingly endless. The turning point. As the enemy breached the inner defenses, Marcus shouted to Elira, "It's now or never. Activate the generators." Elira darted to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. The ship trembled as the auxiliary shields roared to life, creating a shimmering barrier that slowed the invaders' advance. "Hold them off," Marcus barked, rallying the crew. "Just a little longer." The invaders focused their fire on the barrier, their weapons creating cracks in the shimmering field. Marcus gritted his teeth, firing relentlessly as he fought to buy Elira more time. "Almost there," she called out, her voice strained. Finally, the system emitted a high-pitched whine, and a wave of energy erupted from the generators. The feedback pulse swept through the room, disabling the invaders' weapons and sending them into disarray. Marcus seized the moment, charging forward with the remaining crew to finish off the attackers. The tide of battle shifted, and within minutes the room fell silent, save for the crackle of damaged equipment. A hard-won victory. The crew erupted into cheers, their relief palpable. Marcus lowered his rifle, his shoulders slumping as the adrenaline ebbed. He turned to Elira, who was leaning against the console, her glow dim but steady. "You did it," he said, a rare note of admiration in his voice. "We did it," she corrected, offering him a tired smile. Marcus chuckled. "Not bad for a princess." Elira raised a brow. "And not bad for a stubborn human." The tension in the room eased as the crew began tending to the wounded and repairing the damaged systems. For the first time since the attack began, hope felt tangible. As Marcus and Elira stood side by side, their differences momentarily forgotten, they both knew this was only the beginning of their fight. But in that moment, amidst the wreckage of the command deck, they had proven that together, they were a force to be reckoned with.